Welcome. My name is Dwayne Mays, and I'm the Director for the Alaska Department of Labor Workforce Development Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. We are going to introduce you to a podcast that has been developed within the Alaska Department of Labor Workforce Development on the outcome of the Alaska Work Matters Task Force. 2 years ago, we received official support from Governor Dunleavy to form a time-limited task force to take a look at all programs that either directly or indirectly impact Alaskans with disabilities that has to do with competitive and integrated employment. So we have done that. We had 5 task force meetings over the last 2 years, and the result is this report with a set of recommendations that we can bring forward to the state of Alaska, as well as Alaska in general, on how we can improve services that have to do with competitive integrated employment for Alaskans with disabilities. So the financial and administrative support for the Alaska Work Matters Task Force came from the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education. I can't thank them enough for that support, because without it, I don't believe we would have completed this final report. So to the members of the board, with the Governor's Council, and to the Interim Executive Director, Patrick Reinhardt, and his staff, I want to thank you for your support over the last 2 years. We still have more to do, and they will support us in that effort, so onward. So now the podcast interview. Your host will be Jason Caputo with the Alaska Department of Labor. He will be interviewing me, and I will share with you some of, not all, because there's plenty, some of the recommendations that are within this report. Thank you, and enjoy the podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Department of Labor and Workforce Development podcast series, where you'll hear all about how the department helps Alaskan workers, businesses, job seekers, and communities. My guest today is the Director of the Alaska Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, Dwayne Mays. Director Mays, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Jason.
I'm very excited to talk to you today about this Alaska Work Matters Task Force report. And I know that Alaska's current administration is excited about this too. The report lays out a set of recommendations for state agencies in order to improve employment outcomes for Alaskans with disabilities. So we're going to talk about some of those key recommendations and also the next steps needed to make those recommendations a reality. But first, the title you chose for this podcast is The Time Is Now. Why did you choose that title?
I think it really resonates in terms of where we're at over the past couple of years, the challenges that we have had just to try to meet employer demands. So we know that employers are struggling. They have a high percentage of vacant positions, whether that be the state or the federal government or nonprofit, for-profit. And so we just believe that we need to move now, specific to people with disabilities as being another group that they can consider for hard to fill positions within their organization. So there's a lot of evidence that suggests that people with disabilities are great performers. There's been quite a bit of research done to really prove that. There's a lot of evidence in terms of improving overall work culture. And to be afforded that opportunity for a person with a disability, more than likely they're going to stay for a long time to come. So I just feel that given what we've been going through over the last couple of years, that the time is now.
And I've read some of those reports. They were reported in New York Times, Forbes magazine, and so forth, showing, the retention rate for employees with disabilities is longer, is better than people without. So this is really not just about, it is about helping Alaskans with disabilities, how to improve their employment outcomes, but it's also very much about helping Alaskan employers as well get the employees that they need right now.
Yes.
And this is really a call to action, is what you're saying. We got to move. Before we dig into that report, let's just take a brief moment to talk about the task force, which is where these recommendations come from. As one of the leaders of the task force, can you briefly share first your background?
You bet. So with the Alaska Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, and I've been the director coming on 4 years under this current administration. The Alaska Work Matters Task Force recommendation really occurred prior to my time. And so there was a lot of work between the Department of Health and Social Services and Education, as well as Labor, with some national support coming from the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Disability and Employment Programs. So technical assistance to the states to identify how can they improve competitive and integrated employment for Americans, and for us in particular for Alaskans. So all of that happened before my time. And then I arrive and take that and run with it by getting support from our governor. So Governor Dunleavy got behind it, provided me with a letter of support. I used that letter as a badge, if you will. And so when I approached the entities that I believe really need to be a part of the task force, because they bring a set of skills that are important to the task force, whether it be transportation or education, I used that as my badge. And then I was able to build that task force with representation from education, from transportation, the Department of Corrections, the Department of Health and Social Services, and the Department of Labor and Workforce Development. So we formed that task force with supporting CAS to move forward with exploring what do we need to change to improve employment outcomes for Alaskans with disabilities. So policy changes and so forth, structural system changes that would need to occur. So that's the history of the task force up to today.
Right, right. So you have this wonderful support from the top, from the governor on down, which helped you to get all this other state support. And then added to these state entities, you had also leaders from business and leaders from the disability community as well, all working together to make this happen.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Jason. So we made sure to approach all of the beneficiary boards in the state system. So the Alaska Mental Health Board, the Alaska Board for Alcohol and Drug Abuse, the Governance Council on Disabilities and Special Education, the State Independent Living Council, and the State Vocational Rehabilitation Committee. And what we suggested to these boards is that you either have the director there or you have the board chair. And so we also wanted to make sure that we had people with disabilities on that task force because it's about them. And so they need to have a voice. And because this is about employment, job outcomes, employers were invited to be a part of that. And the last piece I want to make sure to mention is that we have a strong partnership with our tribal partners, our tribal vocational rehabilitation partners throughout the state. There's 12 of them, and they're federally funded. So we went to our tribal leadership and asked for a couple of recommendations on who should sit on that task force. And so we had a handful on that task force from the tribes.
Fantastic. That's fantastic. So let's dig into the recommendations here. I have the report here. You can also, those of you who are watching or listening, you can find a link to the report in the description of the video. You can also find it on the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation's website. But here we have basically 5 major sections in the report. Each section has a series of recommendations. And let's start with the first section, State of Alaska as a model employer for individuals with disabilities. Can you just summarize what does that mean, a model employer?
So we actually have received accolades from the State Exchange on Employment and Disabilities. It's a federal contractor, and they sent me a report and they said you should read through that because Alaska's all over it, specific to the state of Alaska being a model employer for people with disabilities. I had to pause because I think, okay, we're doing pretty good, but we can do much better. So the bill, the State of Alaska as a Model Employer bill, passed in 2014 under the Parnell administration. So it's been around for a while, but I think we need to do some fine tuning to it so that we can do a better job of measuring how we're doing and the number of people with disabilities that are actually placed into state positions.
Okay.
So the state of Alaska as a model employer is really important. There's a couple of things to that, but one in particular is, getting Alaskans with disabilities into competitive and integrated employment within the state system.
Right. And so the measure of that is that the state is hiring people with disabilities, and those people are supported in a way that they can be successful
Yes.
in their jobs. Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you think? There's a series of recommendations. There's about 6 in this section, but can you just take one as an example and talk about it?
Well, the very first piece that came up from the board. So when we pulled this time-limited board, it's not a permanent board, but to come together to help us develop a set of recommendations. One of the things that came forward from the members is utilization goals. So we can look back and say, okay, 5 years ago, this was our number. And then we have increased that number over the course of the last 5 years. And we're feeling pretty good because we see that trajectory going up of hiring managers within the state system that understand the value of hiring Alaskans with disabilities.
So that number is the number of Alaskans with disabilities hired.
Yes.
And okay.
Yeah.
And so one of the recommendations is to then set those goals and monitor them so they're
Right.
going up. Okay. And is there another example of a recommendation in that section?
Sure. Centralized accommodation fund. So our federal contractor that was providing us support in terms of the task force had mentioned to us that there are several states that have created a centralized accommodation fund. So the hiring manager does not have to worry about when interviewing someone, and they can see that they come with some significant disabilities. And in their mind, they're probably thinking it's going to cost me some money. If I offer this person a job, it's going to cost me some money. So they're thinking about their budget. So we want to take that out of the mix and at the highest level, look at what average expenditures are, create that fund, take it out of the hands of the hiring manager. They are just going to hire the individual based on how they did in the interview, based on their minimum qualifications. And if they offer the position, they can go to that fund to pay for the cost of accommodations. And the misnomer is that they think it's going to be a lot of money. But there's been a lot of research that concludes or has confirmed that accommodations is about $500 on average. The more complicated accommodations can be up to around $2,000.
But those are much less common.
Yeah.
So great, but even though that accommodations don't cost that much, there's still that fear, and you're removing that fear entirely because they don't have to worry. The hiring manager doesn't have to worry about it anymore.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move to Section 2. Section 2: building the capacity of the private sector to enhance employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities. So, private sector, we're talking about for-profit, nonprofit businesses. So maybe we just jump to the recommendations. What is a recommendation that kind of demonstrates what that building capacity means?
Well, I actually think that we started that some time back. And so within the Alaska Department of Labor Workforce Development, we have a real strong partnership with the Division of Employment and Training. And that's the entity that oversees all of the job centers throughout the state of Alaska. So we created, in collaboration with them, we created what we refer to as the Business Engagement Services Team. And we love the acronym, the BEST. And so that's been in existence for some time. And it's evolved where we have 5 regions, and we'll have a representative in each region that does nothing but that, and or they may have other duties depending on the region. 50% of their job may be doing nothing but employer outreach. So this is about establishing relationships with employers. It's about understanding their work culture. What are your needs? And then we work very closely with that employer to make that match. So state of Alaska, we don't charge the employer for our time. We are free to them. And so it's that partnership. So it's evolved over time where it's getting larger and bigger because of outcome. So one of the pieces to recommendation number 2, and those set of recommendations, is to make sure that we memorialize the best team within state government because of the importance that we have that connection with the employer community. Good paying jobs for Alaskans.
So the danger without that is that here we have all this progress that's happening. We're serving employers better and better at no cost to them.
Right.
We've got specialized people, but with changes over time, there's nothing making sure that that becomes a permanent part of how we do business. And this recommendation is to make sure it is solid going forward.
Yeah.
We don't lose all that progress.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's do another recommendation. There are 6 in total in this section 2, building the capacity of the private sector to enhance employment opportunities for individuals with disabilities. Do you have another recommendation you could talk about?
I do. So on the task force, within the Department of Labor, we had representation from AVTEC, the Alaska Vocational Educational Technical Center in Seward. They're a division within the Department of Labor. And there's been an investment in terms of modernizing and elevating that trade school. And so they have a 95% successful placement rate in terms of placing individuals that graduate or complete their training and obtain their certification. Then they go to work in the training that they received. So that's pretty cool. That's a fantastic thing. And so we want to see more people with disabilities taking advantage of that. And so in working with AVTEC, we've agreed that we will do our part in terms of the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation to assist them to increase those numbers so that we have students with disabilities training in different trades that they offer within that school.
And that's I'm seeing this theme. One of the themes here is that what are we doing that's working well?
Yeah.
Let's invest in that and really get the most out of that as possible. So AVTEC, 95% placement rate. Wow. And so that's wonderful. Yeah.
It's powerful.
So let's go. There are other recommendations in each section, but let's go to the section 3. This is employment services and supports. So again, there are a total of 5 recommendations. What's one that you'd like to talk about?
So this has to do, the piece within this section that we really are very proud about is the repealing of the subminimum wage law for Alaskans with disabilities. So specifically, it's repealing subminimum wage law 14C to complement the regulation already repealed in this area. Alaska has eliminated the authority to pay subminimum wage by regulation. A new bill makes it impossible to reinstate authority for employers to pay subminimum wage via regulatory action. So Governor Dunleavy and Senator McChakin, but government signed that bill into law, meaning that when there's a new administration that comes in, nobody can change that. And that's the power of that bill.
Fantastic. So that's something that is, we're talking about, a lot of these are talking about things that we are aspiring to do. This is something we have now done.
Right.
And it means that basically when a person with disabilities is working at a job, they're going to get paid a fair wage, not a minimum wage or higher, not below that. That's fantastic. Is there another recommendation from that section you want to?
Yes, one more part to this section is the Employment First law. So again, because we're pretty progressive in this state, there was a bill that passed several years ago that was brought forward by the Governor's Council on Disabilities and Special Education, referred to as Employment First. And this really is about making sure that we are employing Alaskans with disabilities into competitive and integrated employment. That's front and center on that law. But the other piece is the importance of reporting out on an annual basis the outcomes of those divisions that either directly or indirectly assist Alaskans with disabilities in going to work. So directly it would be us the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, but there's the Division of Behavioral Health within the Department of Health. And so there's these other entities. And so we want to gather data across all of those divisions and then finalize a report that we would then give to the Alaska Mental Health Trust so they can see that, as well as the relevant commissioners in government so that they can see that as well, and use that to drive any updates that need to occur in terms of policies when it comes to competitive and integrated employment for Alaskans with disabilities. So that Employment First law passed, but we needed to really shore that up and get that language to those relevant commissioners as well as the Alaska legislature. Make that front and center so that they see that.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically part of the issues are that these other agencies that work with people with disabilities that don't have an employment focus as much as someone like the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. The problem is sometimes that planning that they're doing in those services are kind of almost in a silo in a way where they're not considering the employment aspect. And this makes sure that employment is considered, because to be successful in employment, you also need these other types of services to be working together with the employment services. Is that?
Yeah, that's spot on, Jason. It's about collaboration and partnership. And so, those that report out for the Employment First, we should all be speaking the same language. We should all do everything in our power to avoid working in a silo. And I think under this administration, we have seen that improve significantly.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're still in Section 3 here, Employment Services and Supports. Give us one more recommendation from that section.
You bet. So just to add to what I just stated, we do a biannual conference referred to as Employment First. And so this has to do with the Employment First law. And it's a collaboration with all the relevant partners, but the Alaska Mental Health Trust really takes the lead to help us make that happen. So our first one was in 2019, and it was a smashing success. We had a lot of attendance there. So all the different players, when you talk about partnership and collaboration, all came together. And there were moments where we had difficult conversations, but we worked through that. Well, then fast forward, we got through the pandemic and we had a in-person conference back in September referred to as Living, Working, and Playing Towards Independence. And it was really the lead of the State Independent Living Council, but we decided to do it collaboratively together with our employers and with the State of Alaska Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, Behavioral Health, the Alaska Mental Health Trust, and then we came together and we talked about a variety of topics, one to include Employment First.
Right, okay, I see that. Okay, so another way that you're making sure that employment is connected to these other activities, because these independent living activities, because you got to be able to live independently,
Absolutely.
Have your transportation, be able to take care of yourself in order to get to your job, be your best at your job. And so again, this conference, you brought all the players together and talked about those issues and how to collaborate. That's fantastic.
Yeah, living
Okay.
independently,
Yeah.
Jason. They're going to have a hard time working if they're struggling at home. Balance, work-life balance, the ability to go out and play, whatever that might be, and depending on disability, what is it they can do? So work-life balance, all of that leading towards competitive and integrated employment.
Fantastic. All right, let's move to Section 4. This one is titled Preparing for Work and Secondary Transition. There are two recommendations in here. Can you pick one to highlight?
Yeah. This is one of our top priorities within the Alaska Department of Labor Workforce Development, and it's our at-risk youth initiative. And I know the commissioner was clear in her articulation in the very beginning when under this new administration that we have to do something for at-risk youth that come out of the foster care system. They're going from one couch to another. They don't have that functional family dynamic. And so they're struggling. So what are we doing for those youth, whether they're youth without disabilities or youth with disabilities? And so we added some positions to the Department of Labor. And those individuals are working with our community partners to assist nonprofits that work with kids with whether they're with disabilities or not, working with those kids. And so that is a component within the division that we've created in partnership with the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation to get them work, the value of work, the power of work.
Excellent. Well, we're on our final section here, section 5. This is stay at work, return to work. So let's talk about some of the recommendations from this section.
The recommendation that really stands out for me is support and encourage teleworking where possible and desirable. And so this is where I think telework and working from home is not about working well. Telework has also allowed people who have never been able to have a job to now have one. Telework needs to continue post-COVID, since most of these people are now contributing to society. We'll lose that opportunity if it is removed, and we'll go back to state and federal resources. Telework is a game changer for people with disabilities.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah. Is there another one from section 5? I mean, I feel like we have to pause after that one because that is huge. But is there another one from section 5 that you'd like to highlight?
Thank you, Jason. There is another recommendation. Support and expand the Senior Employment Initiative. So that it's happening right now. So the Mature Alaskan Seeking Skills Training Program in this state, every state has one. They call it the Senior Community Services Employment Program. We made the decision to come up with that name here in Alaska. That program has resided with the Division of Employment and Training, and it's gone well. But we know that many of the people that are served through that program have a disability. So within the department, with the commissioner and relevant directors, we talked about, would it make sense to transfer that program over to the Alaska Division of Vocational Rehabilitation? So we made that decision, and that transfer occurred back in July of this year. So we now have that. And we think that we can do more in terms of employing seniors with disabilities here in Alaska in competitive and integrated employment. So the Senior Employment Initiative for the state of Alaska is well on its way.
Fantastic. So another example of one, again, a lot of these recommendations are aspirational. They're things we need to work on to get happen. But here's a second one that in the meantime, it's been done. It's already been done, although there's work continuing to improve that program. That's fantastic. These are really exciting recommendations that obviously can make a huge difference in the lives of Alaskans with disabilities and help Alaskan businesses get great employees. So we have this report, we have these recommendations. Again, some of them have already been done or had significant parts, a few already done, but many have a lot of work still to do. So what is next to make these recommendations a reality?
So currently, at this point in time, we have met with the Commissioner for the Department of Labor and Workforce Development, Dr. Ledbetter, and spent quite a bit of time walking her through the set of recommendations. So that part has been done because she absolutely backed us when we wanted to form this task force. We will be meeting with the Commissioner probably by the time this goes out through this platform. We will have met with him already, but Commissioner Crum with the Department of Health. he too was 100% behind this effort with the task force. And then there are other relevant commissioners that we will be reaching out to. We also want to have a sit down and have a conversation with the governor about these recommendations. I know he wants to hear from us because he was the one that really got behind it in terms of that letter of support. And then we're going to form with all the beneficiary boards, we're going to pull key players into a smaller group to try to move forward with all these recommendations, to find champions. So the ad hoc committee will meet on a regular basis to look at these recommendations and where are we at? Who are our champions? How can we get these recommendations into the state system, into the state of Alaska as a whole? So it's my job as the division director to chair and facilitate that ad hoc committee and push those recommendations forward. So that's what I'm going to be doing.
Well, I can't wait to have you back in the future to talk about the progress that's being made on these. I mean, it's very exciting. You've really avoided a lot of the pitfalls because change is difficult. But as you've kind of laid out, you've got this great, diverse, representative team, the task force that came together to put this recommendations together, covering everybody who's really involved in this, every stakeholder. And then you've got support, high level from the top, from the governor to Commissioner Ledbetter, Commissioner Crum. I mean, I can't wait to hear all the progress that's coming. But to close this out, whenever I've heard you talk about these recommendations, I hear the passion in your voice. And I'm sure the listeners hear that passion as well. Can you share with us, why is this so important to you and this administration?
Thank you for that question. I appreciate that, Jason. I always, when I am talking to the public, I tell them, whoever I'm speaking to, whether it's a chamber meeting somewhere in the state of Alaska or another type of event, that it's personal. It's personal for me. I grew up in disability. I don't have a disability myself, but I was raised by parents that are deaf, and my father was diagnosed with polio at the age of 17. And so I saw it firsthand. And they are true leaders in my book. They always pushed me to make a difference. And so I felt like from the very beginning, educationally, coming up through high school and being around kids with special needs and so forth, that I'm grateful in terms of how I was raised. So it's very personal for me. And so that's what you see. And I'm committed with this administration to see what we can do to improve outcomes for Alaskans with disabilities, competitive and integrated employment.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining and sharing all this great information with us. This has been the Department of Labor and Workforce Development podcast series. I'm Jason Caputo, your host. Thank you for joining us. We hope you have found the podcast enjoyable, informative, and we'll see you next time.